All right, so today's video is my review and reaction to my old power building program. As you guys know, my philosophy on training has entirely changed since this time. So I think it will be kind of funny and just kind of cool to look at the nitty gritty of what I like, what I don't like from how I used to program this stuff. So with that being said, as you guys can probably tell, new setting, new phone, same great flannel. So let's dive into the program. Before I get into a whole ton of the nitty gritty, let's look at the actual results. So my true goals that I wanted from this program, I wanted to get bigger, but I was trying to get bigger through pursuing strength, particularly in the squat, bench, deadlift. And the more you look into this program, the more evident that becomes. So when it comes to the actual results, in terms of strength, mainly in the power lifts, it actually was pretty good. And I don't have hard dates of when I started and stopped this program, so it's hard to put a time frame on this. The results aren't that bad. So as you can see here, my start 1 rep max on squat was 375. I ended up at 455, so not bad at all there. That's a pretty solid increase. What's that, 80 pounds? When it comes to deadlift, I went from 525 to 605, so again, another 80-pound increase. And when it comes to bench, I went from 315 to 330. So for somebody that struggled with pressing, I have very long arms. Basically, pressing has never been easy for me. It's not terrible. It's not a great increase in strength for bench, but there is some progress there. So that was cool. If you see my goal 1 rep max is in this green cell beneath it. I beat the squat goal 1 rep max by a little bit. Again, by 20 pounds on my deadlift, and then I did fall 10 pounds short on my bench goals. So not terrible. And then if you see the other notable PRs, of course, I wasn't just getting strong in 1 rep max. I was getting pretty damn strong in higher rep maxes too. So I hit a 500 for 10 deadlift. This was sumo. 225 for 20 bench. This was touch and go, just a standard bench press. And then for squats, I ended up hitting 405 for 8. So those are all pretty good numbers, I'd say, and this is kind of when I was at my peak strength is when I finished up this program. So with that being said, let's dive into the actual program itself. So as you can see here, this is a little bit of a layout of what the program is. So it's an upper-lower split starting with a lower day. So it's a lot of deadlifts set up in a 5-3-1 modification for the progression there. Volume squats, and then light back work after. The next day is an upper where it's bench press and then overhead press work. Day 3 is another lower, so the squats are going to be 5-3-1, and then I go back to upper, which is speed deadlifts, heavy back work, and then overhead press work. And then we go back to lower day, which is squats 5x5, and then we finish up on day 6 with an upper day, bench press, overhead press work, and then heavy back work. So right off the bat, you can tell it's a very SBD-oriented program. The split is pretty good in terms of the upper-lower. I think the programming between the deadlifts and the squats, it's a lot. I mean, I'm training a lower body compound lift that puts stress on the hips and knees 4 times a week. That's quite a bit. And as you can see, like it's something that isn't optimal for hypertrophy. It took a lot out of me. It took a lot out of my recovery. And this isn't something you can just run forever with sufficient effort, volume, etc. So the split overall, the upper lower part of it is good. I actually still run an upper lower, and it is my favorite program. But the way that I put the upper lower together isn't the best way to do it. And when we dive into the program, you'll kind of see why. So, and just remember, this is as much of a reaction as it is a review, because I don't remember everything about this, like the nitty gritty stuff. So let's go into week 1. So my bad, not week 1. Let's go into day 1. So I have this listed as a Monday session: deadlifts, volume squats, and then light back work. So as you can see, we start off with 5 sets of deadlifts. So we start off 5 reps at 70%, then we jump up to 75, 80, 85%, and then we finish it off with an AMRAP at 90%. So I'd go to 90% of my estimated 1 rep max when I started, and I would do as many reps as I possibly could that set, basically taking it to zero RIR. I don't recall ever failing a rep on deadlifts. I don't think I ever pushed it that far back then. So yeah, I'd go to about RPE 9.5 or RPE 10, but not actually taking it to failure. So yeah, as you can see, a lot of deadlift volume to start off, and a lot of it is submaximal. I mean, doing 5 reps at 70 or 75%, you're not quite pushing enough, but it's still going to be building up a little bit of fatigue that way. So deadlifts, yeah, not too bad, but I mean, all that work in total, it's going to tire you out. That's a lot of warm-up sets to get up to those weights, since I'm doing a set of 3 and an AMRAP at 90% every single week. One big thing I remember about this session is everything I would do after that suffered. There's no need for me to be training at 90% of deadlifts if I'm looking to put on size. Even 85% is pushing it. I don't think it's a bad idea to go into lower rep ranges like 4, 5, or 6, but it's just a matter of not going to the extreme and pushing to the 1s, 2s, and even triples. It's a lot to work up to. It takes a lot of time, and it's fatiguing, it's tiring, and this stuff does start to take away from the rest of the work you have in that session. So this would smoke me. To follow that up, I would do squats, a 4x10 at 65% of my 1 rep max. So this was always pretty challenging, of course. 4 sets of 10 for something like squats. Static rep ranges aren't the worst because you can keep a couple reps in reserve and still make muscular gains there, because it's a heavy stimulative lift. So that's not the end of the world. I wouldn't do that now, but it's not terrible. The volume is a little bit high, especially after 5 sets of deadlifts and basically maxing out too. So yeah, it's a lot of hip and knee work to start off. I would change this now. I definitely would. I'd probably swap the sequencing. I would change the squat to a leg press or a hack squat, a Smith machine hack squat, or even like an SSB or a barbell plat style squat. I would do that first, and I would get rid of the static rep range. I'd change it to a dynamic rep range so you can base your reps off of your proximity to failure rather than basing your weight and your reps off of what you're prescribing arbitrarily. So as long as you're in a good range there, I think that would be the best way to do it. I would also change the deadlift from a sumo to an RDL. I think in most cases that would generally be the way to go, and I think that would be a great way to start off, and that's ironically enough, that's what I do now, and it works pretty well. So once we're done with the heavier work, with the deadlifts and the volume squats, we're moving into what I put as a light back work. So this is where it starts to get pretty interesting too, and you can really see the difference of how articulate I am with my strength training versus my quote-unquote accessory work. So you'll see my light back work, I have pull-ups. It's just 30 reps. I didn't even list anything for how many sets to do, how many reps to do per set, no rep ranges, nothing. It's just do 30 reps, however many sets it takes you. So it's not a terrible way to train, but it's one of those things where if you want hypertrophy, you want to stack challenging sets. You want a few challenging straight sets, and how much volume you do is going to vary based on your program, based on your goals, and based on how you train and just who you are. So the fact that there's no sets listed, I just think it's lazy. I didn't know why or how many sets to do, so I was like, all right, well, I'll just do 30 reps and try and progress on that, which isn't terrible, but why not just start off with 2 sets, pick a rep range within there, and then slowly add reps over time? When it comes to something like 30 reps, like, yeah, I could have done maybe 10, 9, 8, but then I had 3 reps left over, so I have to rest 3 minutes and just do a set of 3 just to hit 30. It doesn't really make any sense. Those final 3 reps, I'd argue, are a complete waste of time because they're just far away from failure. So think of hypertrophy as how many hard sets can you push? Like the rep goal, the 30 reps, that's not a rep goal. A rep goal is something you're trying to surpass only doing hard sets. This isn't a rep goal. This is a toned down, watered down version of it that's more arbitrary. And beneath that, we have a glute ham raise for 50 reps. Same concept here. The glute ham raise, it is a pretty good lift for strength building, especially for the deadlift and the posterior chain in general. It's not going to do a whole ton for hypertrophy. There are better options. The plane of movement that you're working in biases the shortened position a lot, so I would suggest something like an RDL or even a back extension would be a great variation for the glute ham raise, in my opinion. Beneath that, we have a T-bar row, which this is where the exercise selection actually starts to get pretty good. So the T-bar row is a great lift. The problem is the set and the rep scheme. Again, it's just 4 sets of 15. Why am I doing 4 sets? I didn't know. I just put 4 because 3 is hard. Why not do 1 more? It's just, it's a completely random number. So 4 sets of 15. 4 sets wasn't something that I worked up to. I'm already fatigued. At this point, it would make more sense for me to do 2 sets of maybe 8 to 12 or even 10 to 15 for that matter. The rep range at this point isn't as important as how many sets we're doing and the quality of those sets. So 4 sets of 15, this means that what I'm doing is I'm picking a weight I can do for 20 reps, so my 4th set I can still get 15. So it's 3 sets that are a complete waste of time anyways because I'm fatigued and I'm keeping multiple reps in reserve on this lift just so I can get that random 4th set for 15 reps. There's a much better way I could have gone about this. I would change this to 2 sets of 10 to 15, and that way I can have a dynamic rep range and I can execute 2 high quality sets right there. 3 sets if I need to push it maybe, but at this point in this session, 2 sets should be just fine. Beneath that I have a lat pull down, 4x10, what do you know? Same concept there. No point in going into that. It's just the same thing I just said. Just copy and paste it to the lat pull down. And then beneath that I have a cable 1-arm row. So at this point, the cable 1-arm row is pretty redundant. If this was a push-pull leg split, you could make a case for keeping it in because you have less frequency, but since it's an upper-lower split where I can train upper body 3 times a week, there's no point in doing the same movement or at least a similar movement pattern twice in the session. And of course, at some point, it does make sense to work up to that if needed, but that's the thing is if needed. You don't want to start off at that. Overall, it's okay. It's not terrible, but you can clearly see the programming is top heavy. It's lopsided. It's not the best. Let's move on to day 2. So Tuesday's session, it's bench press and then overhead press work. So this is what you'd call an upper body day. So this is where it starts to get pretty interesting because I start off with bench press and it's the exact same progression scheme that I had for deadlifts the day before. So I would argue this is worse for bench press than it is for deadlifts because bench is something you can go higher reps on and is going to build you more muscle with moderate to higher reps anyways. Doing an AMRAP at 90% and a triple on bench is, I'm not going to say it's a waste of time because it's not, technically it's not a waste of time, but there's more productive things you could be doing. I would change this to 4 sets of 6 to 10. Even 4 sets is pushing it. Like there's no need to do 5 sets here. And even on bench, like those first 2 sets, you're far away from failure. It's a waste of time especially for an upper body lift, even though it's a bench press and you probably can get away with slightly farther away from failure work. It's still something you should be pushing pretty damn hard. So I would move this to 2 to 4 sets, taking it very close to failure, maybe 1-0 rep in reserve. I'd change the rep range anywhere between 6 and 12 should be fine on here. So after we have that bench press work, we have strict press. So for strict press, I'm just working up to a top set of 5, and that's the only set that I'm doing. So I would change this to, I think 2 sets would be better. I've already done a decent amount of bench, so I don't need to do a whole ton of work since that hits the front delts pretty well. I'd move this to 2 sets, maybe to 3 sets. I might keep myself in a little set range there from 2 to 3. And I would bump the rep range up quite a bit. I'd say 6 reps minimum. I do like to work in 8 to 12 for my overhead press work. And then as far as exercise selection goes, I would probably put both of these lifts in a Smith machine or move them to dumbbells. The strict press, I would also consider moving to a hammer strength plate loaded machine. I think that would be pretty solid. And that should work totally fine there. So I do prefer the Smith. I do really like dumbbells. And then especially for the overhead press, I really do like the plate loaded machine. Hammer strength is my favorite there. Beneath this,
we have OHP work. So this is just accessory work to build my overhead press. So that makes more sense now that if I just did one top set of 5, and now I'm doing back off accessory work, I would ditch that concept entirely. I would get rid of this Arnold press here entirely because I already did strict press. If anything, I just bump it up to 3 sets just to be sure. I just don't know if that's even quite necessary. An easy bar front raise after that, I would definitely ditch that. That's a lot of front delt work in one session. And then dumbbell overhead press for 4 sets of 20 after all that. I mean, that is overkill if I've ever seen it. I would change all of this to tricep work, rear delt work, side delt isolation, even like a fly variation. This would all be much more productive. So if I was going to do the bench press, say on a Smith machine where you're not quite getting the full stretch compared to dumbbells, I would add in a fly variation for maybe the Arnold press. For the front raise, I would just change this to like a cable side raise, so you can bias the length and position and just push those super hard. And then for dumbbell overhead press, I would change that to tricep work, and that's probably what I'd leave it at for that day and just keep it as more of like a push day. With that being said, I would probably add biceps to the lower day before so we can just target everything there. And as you can see, there are going to be more flaws that I realize as this program goes on. Like there's no calf work, there's no ab work so far. I'm yet to see the rest of the program, but I can start to see where this is starting to head. The next session is day 3. It's the Wednesday session. It's 5-3-1 on squats, and then it's leg accessory work after that. So I'm going to ignore the term accessory there and just act like I didn't used to say that unironically. So when it comes to the exercise selection for today, we're starting off with squats. Interesting. We're going for 5-5-5-3 AMRAP. Haven't seen that yet on this program. So again, those first 2 sets are kind of redundant. I would change this to another squat variation. So say I do Smith machine hack squats on the first day, I'd change this to maybe a Smith machine squat, maybe a hack squat, just something to bias the quads and emphasize the knees more than the hips. I would also change the rep ranges a little bit. It's okay to go low in reps, so this is just, it's a little bit too low for my liking. I'd go 5 reps minimum. I'd maybe go for a heavier day, I'd do like a 5 to 8 rep range. I think that should be totally fine. And I would do probably 3 sets on here should be fine, whether it's a hack squat or a Smith machine hack squat. That should work pretty well. So again, I ditch the AMRAP at 90%, I ditch the triple, and then I'd keep 3 sets of 5, get rid of the percentages, just move it into a rep range instead, and that should be good. And then when it comes to the leg accessory work, I'm trying to say that without smirking, we have glute ham raise for 50 reps, no sets or anything, so we're already seeing the GHR twice in the week. I don't think that's necessary. I would actually just ditch that lift entirely for something a little bit more stimulative, like I was saying. After that, we have leg press, 5 sets of 20, which, I mean, that's just, if it's going to be a hard set of 20, like 1 set, 2 sets should be fine. If you're doing 5 sets of 20, it's probably just overkill in most cases. It's definitely something you could work up to, but to keep that in a program permanently, it's a little bit ridiculous, just to be I guess blunt with that. So I think 5x20 is a little bit overkill there. Doing high reps on leg press is fine. Like I would probably bump that down to about 15 reps, so I'm not just like stopping the set because I give up or I'm out of breath or my legs are just burning too much. I'd probably drop that down to maybe a 12 to 15. And even if I wanted to keep a higher volume, like I'd stick with 3 sets, like 3 sets of 12 to 15. Mentally and psychologically, it's less daunting. And you can kind of just leave everything on the table in those 3 sets, and you're still getting good volume in, so that should be totally fine. And again, I'm not really looking into weekly volume here because I don't have that all calculated out. I'm not going to remake the entire program, but this is just a good general start to rebuilding this program, which is it's taking a lot of rebuilding, as you can see. Beneath this, I have lying hamstring curls, 3 sets of 12. Again, the 3 sets is fine. I would get rid of the 12 reps. For something like this, you want to push it extremely hard. There's no point in locking yourself into a static rep range, not even a static rep range, because there's no range. It's just static reps. I would say change this to a range of maybe 8 to 12. I would probably change the lying hamstring curl to a seated hamstring curl to get more of a stretch on the hamstrings. And to top that off, I would probably add some type of intensity technique where I can maybe do partials past failure, or even just take it to failure. Like it's these little things, these little cues and methods that you use that really emphasize the hypertrophy aspect of your training. So again, these days are super lopsided. They're very top heavy in terms of the programming. I would put a lot more attention to detail into the quote unquote hypertrophy work of this and not just completely half-ass it. When you half-ass your programming, you're subconsciously telling yourself you don't have to train it as hard. And as you can see, my physique ended up top heavy. It was lopsided, and it wasn't an aesthetic physique by any means. Beneath this, leg extension, you can copy and paste what I said about hamstring curls to the same thing. Leg extension's a great lift. I'd keep it in there. But then again, if I'm doing 3 lower body days in this week, if I'm doing a squat variation and 3 sets of 15 on leg press, do I really need leg extensions? I'd argue probably not. Beneath that, 6 sets of 15 on calf raises. So for calf raises, at this point in my training, I don't even really give myself a rep range or a target to hit. I just do the weight that I have, and once it starts to feel light, I'll add weight. And this is because it's so hard to distinct what's a full rep and what's a 95% complete rep and a 90%. And then before I know it, like, when am I doing length and partials? What counts as a length and partial? So I'll literally just put in an asterisk in my program to say I did this set, and for however many sets I did, I'll put in the asterisk. And then I'll put a little plus sign after that if I did length and partials, which I do every single set of calf training I do now. That's something that I include. So the calf raises, I'd keep it. If anything, I'd drop the rep entirely. I'd maybe put in a vague range like 10 to 20 or something like that, so I have a general idea of where I should be training. And then the volume for 6 sets, I would probably decrease that a little bit, or even just put in a range of like 2 to 4 sets. Calves, you can train with high intensity and high volume. There's no major joint involved, then that's going to affect other lifts, so you should be fine. You're not going to get injured or hurt yourself doing calf raises in most cases, as long as you have healthy ankles and calves, so you should be good there. Next day, we've got this Thursday. This is, I think it's upper, yeah, it's the second upper day. So this is funny because I'm doing speed deadlifts, overhead press work, and then heavy back work on a quote unquote hypertrophy focused upper day. So I'm doing 6 sets of 1 at 65% for a speed deadlift. This is so ridiculous. This is so stupid. So everything about this is just terrible. When it comes to deadlifts, 6 sets is pretty high. 1 rep is stupidly low. 65% is also stupidly low if you're just doing a 1 rep especially. So this is something I would just completely slash out and I would just bring back RDLs. I'm not even going to try and revamp this right now. This is just so stupid. Beneath this, we've got overhead press work. So standing dumbbell overhead press. The lift is pretty good. I'd argue seated is potentially better, but not something that's truly worth noting. I prefer to leave this as an optional thing. Next to this, I have four sets of 20. Again, you're seeing more of this mindless programming. Like with deadlifts, it's 6 by 1 at this percentage. This is the weight I'm using. This is exactly how I'm gonna go about it. For anything that isn't SBD, it's just cookie cutter, slap sets, and then slap a static rep on top of that, and you're good. The only problem is you're not good. This sucks. Beneath that, face pull, 4 sets of 20. Again, face pulls, I kind of see like calf raises where it's tough to tell what's a clean rep, what counts, what's a full rep. It's a gray area, so I'd say 4 sets is okay. It might not be necessary to go that high. I'd say 2 to 4 sets, and I'd give a wide range, like 10 to 20. So you can do partials and just push it hard, or even cheat reps for that matter to push close to failure. Again, it's a low risk movement. Beneath this, we have the heavy back training. Oh boy. So when it comes to the heavy back training, the first thing you'll see on here is a rack pull, 4 sets of 3. This isn't bad. Rack pulls are a pretty limited range of motion for the hips. So I'd argue just doing RDLs at the start should cover that totally fine. And a lot of people will say, well, isn't rack pulls worth it because of that weighted stretch? And I'd say yes, but at the same time, you could just do power shrugs and get the weighted stretch and a contraction and an eccentric. So I'd say changing this to power shrugs and maybe decreasing the sets to 2 to 3 and bumping the reps up to like 8 to 15 would be a much better call. Not that rack pulls are useless, because I am a fan of rack pulls. I would just change this to power shrugs if we're already doing RDLs. Beneath this, we have Pendlay rows, 3 sets of 10. Another great lift. Since we're already doing power shrugs and RDLs, I would change this to a chest supported row. So maybe like a chest supported T-bar row. That would be a pretty good option. You can't just murder your lower back. Again, the rep range I'd change, but I'm not going to keep repeating myself on the static reps. Pull-ups beneath that, 40 reps. I've already spoken about that. One arm rows beneath that. Again, this is overkill at this point. There's no point in doing more rows. Lat pull downs beneath that. I'd argue this is probably overkill, especially with 3 upper days. If this is a push-pull legs, or if it was a 4-day upper-lower split, that's fine. I could keep it in, but 4 sets is a little bit ridiculous. I'd keep maybe, if I want to do 4 sets on pull-ups, that's fine, but I'd maybe do 1, then 2, then 3 if needed long-term down the road with the lat pull-downs beneath it. I'd also change the grip if I'm doing an overhand just outside shoulder width pull-up. Why do another shoulder width just outside shoulder width overhand lat pull down? I would change at least one of them to a neutral grip, maybe supinate one of them and just kind of go from there. And then beneath that, we have farmer's carries, 5 sets on there. At this point, my traps are fine. I already did RDLs, I already did rows, I already did power shrugs. There's no point in doing farmer's carries for the traps. If we're talking about forearm size, I prefer a dynamic movement. So I do a stretch wrist curl. It's less systemically fatiguing. It's more direct. You get the stretch on your wrists. You get the full range of motion. That's what I would go for. And then this is another upper day where it's just, there's no chest work. There's no tricep work. There's no like side delt isolation. Like there is face pulls, but these days are very lopsided in terms of the programming and even the exercise selection. Like there's a lot of lifts in here that I do like and I do still do in some way, shape, or form, but it's very mindless is what I'm trying to say. This is a perfect peek into my old mindset where I'd put so much time and thought and effort into squat, bench, deadlift, and then just slap a bunch of random accessory work after that. That was a complete waste of time because I would do it enough to tire me out, but not enough to actually get anything out of it. So I should have just done squat, bench, deadlift and just kept it at that. The results wouldn't have been any worse or any better, but I would have wasted less time in the gym. Friday, this is a lower day. So this is 5x5 squats and then a leg accessory session after this. So squats 5x5 at 72 to 78%. This isn't horrible. It could be worse. I'd probably bump the reps up slightly and bump the sets down just a little bit. So I'd maybe do 3 to 4 sets of maybe 6 to 8. 5 reps is a little bit low, and again, it is static, so I'd like to see a dynamic range on there. Beneath that, glute ham raise for 50 reps. Jesus, I need to get rid of this mindset. So 50 reps, I would change that to a few sets, and again, I would just change the lift entirely. It's not a waste of time to do that lift. It's still decent, but I would pick something different. Maybe, you know what, maybe keeping it once a week is all right. Beneath that, 5 sets of 10 on leg press. Again, that's just overkill. That's a lot. Hamstring curl and leg extension, 3x12, and then calf raise, 6x15. So again, this is very similar to the other leg day. There's a few things I'd change on here that I already mentioned. Let's move on to the final day. The Saturday one, looks to be a complete upper session. So we'll start off with a bench press, 5x5 at 80%. I would change this to a dynamic rep range, lower the reps a little bit, same exact protocol as the squat that I said. Strict press, 4x10 beneath that. Same thing, I'd change it to a dynamic rep range and probably decrease the sets a little bit. Overhead press work following this, machine overhead press 4x20. And then 4x15 of lateral raise, and then 5x20 on face pulls. So at least this is a little bit more complete in terms of selection. I would just change the volume and change the reps the exact same way I've said throughout this entire video. And then beneath that, we've got the heavy back work. So this is going to be
one arm rows, lat pull downs, T-bar rows, and then farmer's carries. So I'm not going to talk about the sets and reps here. Let's talk about the exercise selection. So when it comes to this, there is very little bicep work, there's very little tricep work, and there's no ab work. And that's what we've seen throughout this entire program. So there's a few glaring issues there, and you can kind of see why I ended up with this underwhelming physique compared to the numbers that I showed you at the start of this video. So the one arm rows, this is a great lift. I absolutely love one arm rows, and I would definitely keep these in. Lat pull downs, again, that's a great lift if I'm targeting the lats. I'd actually keep that in too. When it comes to the T-bar rows, this is where I'd sub it out for something that's more beneficial that hasn't been hit yet. So as you can see, biceps and triceps, they haven't been trained. And I think this is worth making that change. So I'd change the T-bar row to maybe some overhead tricep work, like a French press or a cable overhead extension. I would also consider trading this T-bar row for even something like a Smith JM press or a push down in the new setup that I've been using that I talked about in my tricep video. And then beneath that, we've got farmer's carries. At this point, I need some bicep work. The compounds, there's a lot of them. There's a ton of push and pull compounds. They're just not going to build your arms, at least for me. They're not going to build my arms as much as I thought they would. And that was a big regret. I'll never understand the mindset of don't do your bicep curls because your pull-ups train them or because your rows train them. Like why are you too lazy to do curls? That's the way I see it. And the people that say curls don't work, you're just not training them hard enough. Like there's a YouTuber, I'm not going to call him out by name, but I saw a clip the other day where it's a voiceover of him saying, curls have never worked for my biceps, so I'm just going to stop doing them. In the background of that voiceover, it's him doing bicep curls, and he's taking a barbell and doing this, cheating in that bottom half rep, leaving like 15 reps in the tank. And it's like, I can't believe I used to fall for that bait. It's honestly ridiculous. So there's a lot that would have to be revamped with this program. I think in the day-to-day, I made some good changes. And once those changes are plugged in, I would have to go in and make sure everything fits in terms of total volume, total frequency, and just make sure it all meshes together in an actual program. So it would take a lot of work to actually rebuild this, but it's potentially doable. Overall, I'd give this program maybe a 3 out of 10 for hypertrophy. There are some things that are decent. Like I think the overall exercise selection is pretty good. It's not bad by any means. There is room for improvement, of course. It's the programming, the mindless 50 reps of this or 30 reps of pull-ups or a 4x20, a 6x15 on calf raises. There's no thought or anything behind it. And there's a clear hierarchy in each session, which I am kind of against at this point. I don't think it makes sense because in bodybuilding, you need a complete physique. There's no accessories, there's no main lifts. It's a complete session that trains every muscle in a complete way. So the good, I'd say, is the split, the upper lower split is good. The exercise selection is also decent. I'll include that in the good. And then I'd say for the bad, yeah, it's the mindless accessory work, the mindless static reps, the redundancy in some of these days where it's just repeating like 3 similar row variations in a row, or doing pull-ups and then lat pull-downs where it should be a little bit more nuanced and have some more variation in terms of grip, angle, all this kind of stuff. The days are very skewed towards squat, bench, deadlift, which is overrated for hypertrophy, in my opinion. I'm just going to say that. And then, you know what? That's pretty much what I'll leave it at. I already kind of tore everything else apart. So in general, this program did not get me the results I was truly looking for. It got me the results that I thought would help me get the results that I wanted. So to put that in more context, I thought if I chased these big numbers, I would look big. It got me the big numbers, I just didn't look big. So there's a few issues with the program, and yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Let me know if you guys have any questions or anything.